Good day and welcome to another perspective. Before we begin, I'll give you the obligatory warning. Viewer, listener, discretion is advised. There, you've been warned. Now let's get on with today's topic. Y'all are going to have to pay attention here. We're going back in time, again, about 172 years ago. Sam Elliott should be narrating this, but he wasn't available, so you're stuck with me. On March 19, 1848, a baby boy was born in Monmouth, Illinois. He was the fourth child in the family, and as time goes on, he eventually had 7 full siblings and 1 half-brother. The boy grew up and eventually had several occupations. At the age of 16, he became a teamster and earned a reputation as a boxing referee. He became a local constable in Lamar, Missouri in 1869 at the age of 21. He was married on the 10th of January 1870, but his wife died of typhoid fever, pregnant with their first child. This story could go on for a while. If you're a Western movie buff, you know who I'm referring to. He was a buffalo hunter, a teamster, a gambler, a businessman, and there was a time when some thought he may have been a pimp, but his claim to fame was lawman. He's a fascinating character and a legend of the Old West. Wyatt Barry Stapp Earp, or Wyatt Earp for short, was perhaps the most famous lawman of his time. He's a controversial figure, that's for certain. His early law enforcement career wasn't all that good. After the death of his wife, Urilla, he suffered some legal setbacks. He was sued by the county and a local businessman in 1871. Wyatt and 2 henchmen were accused of stealing 2 horses in March of 1871. Now, in those days, horse thieving could have been a hanging offense. 1 henchman was acquitted, but him and Wyatt and the other remained in custody. Wyatt escaped and went to Peoria, Illinois. While in Peoria, he and his brother Morgan may have ran a cat house, or a brothel, if you will. They were both arrested and fined for this breach of the law in February 1872 and again in May 1872. There were also reports that they had a floating brothel, and the town of Peoria didn't have a lot of respect for Wyatt and Morgan. Wyatt later denied all this. In the meantime, he picked up a common-law wife, Sally Heckle, who I don't have a picture of. They moved to Wichita, Kansas, where Wyatt's brother ran, guess what, a brothel. Wyatt may have been a bouncer at this time. Wichita, Kansas was a cattle town in the 1870s, and it had a railroad terminal. The town was full of drunken armed men, and all the lawmen were kept busy. When the cowboys left, Wyatt found alternate employment, joining the marshal's office in 1875. While he was a good lawman, he was accused of helping his brothers, some of whom ran brothels, become lawmen. In 1876, Wichita canned him. While he was a good lawman, and you all heard this, Wichita fired him. So his brother James had moved on to Dodge City. And guess what James ran? If you guessed James ran a brothel, you're right, and Wyatt came to join him. Wyatt gained employment as an assistant marshal and spent some time in Deadwood, South Dakota, in the winter of 1876/77. Deadwood is a story unto itself, and I might cover that in a future episode. In the spring of 1877, he returned to Dodge City and resumed his employment as a lawman. That fall, he was commissioned as a U.S. Marshal to chase a fugitive who had robbed a train. Wyatt chased this guy to Texas, where one of the great partnerships in history was formed. This is where he first met Dr. John Henry Holliday. I'm your huckleberry. A dentist, known as Doc Holliday. He's another enigma, and he really deserves an episode of his own. Wyatt made his way back to Dodge City in May 1878 and resumed his position with the Dodge City PD. Later that summer, Doc Holliday arrived with his common-law wife, Big Nose Kate. They sure had colorful names in those days. Legend has it that a bunch of cowboys were causing a fuss in the Long Branch Saloon. Wyatt burst in and was faced with numerous cowboys pointing guns at him. Doc Holliday had been playing cards in the back. Doc pointed his pistol at the chief troublemaker's head, and the cowboys decided it wasn't worth the risk. The cowboys were disarmed, and the legend of Doc Holliday was born. While he was in Dodge City, he became acquainted with Ed and Bat Masterson, two lawmen we may chat about later. He also met Mattie Blaylock, who was his common-law wife until 1881, and he also met a gunfighter by the name of Luke Short. Wyatt and Mattie moved to Tombstone, Arizona in December of 1879. Jim Earp and his wife Bessie accompanied Wyatt. Many of Wyatt's brothers were already in the area, and Wyatt eventually secured employment. Doc and Big Nose Kate arrived in September of 1880. The picture I put up is of the actors who portrayed Doc and Kate in the movie Wyatt Earp. The area around Tombstone was wild and untamed, and that includes several of the residents. It seems there was a bunch of semi-outlaws that were referred to as cowboys, which was a disparaging epithet. Cowboys were outlaws and ne'er-do-wells. Any law-abiding cattlemen were known as ranchers or cattle herders. This was a regional distinction, and to be called a cowboy insinuated that you were an outlaw. One of Wyatt's encounters with this lot included one where he subdued and arrested William Curly Bill Brocious, a local associated with the cowboys. He accidentally shot the local sheriff, who died a few days later. Wyatt and some others ensured he wasn't lynched in Tombstone. Curly Bill didn't appreciate it. He thought Wyatt had been somewhat nasty when he was arrested. Actually, Wyatt pistol whipped him to subdue him. Curly Bill was now an enemy of the Earps. Wyatt attempted to enter politics, but some underhandedness and his relative inexperience resulted in defeat. He didn't make any friends with the local marshal, John Behan, or Ike and Billy Clanton, two local ne'er-do-wells. Things went downhill with the feuding between the Cowboys and the Earps in 1881. The Cowboys were responsible for a series of crimes, including stagecoach robberies, murder during stagecoach robberies, and threatening the lives of the Earps. It all came to a head on October 26, 1881, at the OK Corral. Virgil asked Wyatt Morgan and Doc Holliday to assist him in disarming the Clantons and the others at the OK Corral. It turned into a full-blown gunfight at about 10 to 30 feet in range. At the end of it, 3 of the cowboys were dead, and 3 of the 4 Earp party were wounded. Wyatt didn't have so much as a scratch. The gun that was used by Doc Holliday was a short double-barrel shotgun known as a coach gun, devastating at close range. Ike Clanton, who had fled the scene but may have been unarmed, filed murder charges against the Earps and Doc Holliday, but they were ultimately not indicted for murder. As one would expect, the Clantons were not impressed. After the trial, Virgil was ambushed on the 28th of December in 1881 and seriously wounded, with Ike Clanton being the most likely suspect. Ike was eventually cleared of the charge and refused to reconcile the differences between them and the Earps. On March 18, 1882, Morgan was shot while playing billiards and died a short time later, 40 minutes or so. The vendetta ride started the next day. Wyatt formed a posse the very next day that included Doc Holliday, 2 Earp brothers, and several others friendly to the Earps. Their mission was twofold: to protect the Earp family and track down the murderers. They accompanied Morgan's body to his family in California. On the way, it was found out that one of the men thought responsible, Frank Stillwell, for Morgan's death was waiting to finish Virgil off. Frank was found the next morning dead beside the railway tracks filled with buckshot and bullets. Wyatt and 5 of his posse were indicted for murder and warrants were issued for their arrest. The vendetta ride lasted for quite a while. The local sheriff, John Mahan, had trailed them but never caught them. While out on the ride, Wyatt and the posse stumbled across Curly Bill, the one Wyatt had pistol whipped and then saved from lynching, and a group of the cowboys. Naturally, a gunfight ensued. Negotiation wasn't a big tactic in those days. Curly Bill was killed, and Wyatt, despite being caught under fire, never again received a scratch. We're going to kind of branch off here for a second. Now, if you remember that Wyatt had a common-law wife, Mattie Blaylock. Mattie suffered from severe headaches and became addicted to opiates and eventually completed suicide. It seems Wyatt may have had another love interest, a woman named Josie Sadie Marcus. There isn't much to go on, but Doc had insulted Wyatt by calling him a damn Jew boy. Wyatt became angry and left. He later married Josephine in 1892. Their relationship was tempestuous, I guess how you say it. She gambled, he had affairs, she was controlling, and she had affairs too. Wyatt was also an unpaid movie consultant. One of his good friends was Tom Mix, an actor who portrayed the cowboys during the silent movie era. Wyatt had an influence on a young actor at the time who imitated Wyatt's method of walking, talking, his persona, and adapted it to the big screen. That young actor was John Wayne, aka the Duke, who went on to star in about 170 movies. Wyatt died January 13, 1929, in Los Angeles. He was cremated and Josephine didn't attend the funeral, which infuriated some. Wyatt had no regrets about the shootings at the OK Corral. Here's a direct quote. "It's too bad a really good voice actor can't do this like Sam Elliott, but again, you're going to be stuck with me." Quote, "For my handling of the situation at Tombstone, I have no regrets. Were it to be done over again, I would do exactly as I did at that time. If the outlaws and their friends and allies imagined that they could intimidate or exterminate the Earps by a process of murder and then hide behind alibis and the technicalities of the law, they simply missed their guess. I want to call your particular attention again to one fact, which writers of Tombstone incidents and history apparently have overlooked. With the deaths of the McClowrys, the Clantons, Stillwell, Florentino Cruz, Curly Bill, and the rest, organized, politically protected crime and depredations in Cochise County ceased." End quote. Wyatt was about 6 feet tall, and that's very tall for that day and age, and is still considered a little tall on the tall end today. He was probably about average 6 inches taller than most men at that time. He was apparently an exceptionally good shot and never was wounded once. Some people are lucky like that, but his skill with firearms and his cool demeanor probably had a great deal to do with his luck. So let's discuss this cool demeanor. About a year ago, I was fortunate enough to be selected for some training, a course on mental readiness. Part of the course dealt with the brain and how it interprets incoming stimulus. The amygdala is the part of the brain that processes emotions, fear being one of them. The cortex is the thinking part of the brain that gives us the ability to think, whereas the amygdala is pure reaction, fight, flight, or freeze. The amygdala can be calmed down by training. The U.S. Navy SEALs do this by what they call the hooded box drill, and it plays a huge part in the pool competency test. Check it out online. It's intense. Maybe Wyatt was hardwired along with his brothers that caused them not to react to fear the way the others do. Maybe their amygdalas were different or somehow mutated. What else can explain his apparent calmness? We also need to think about the time and place in which the Earps lived. At least two were veterans of the war between the states, and they were constantly on the move seeking their fortunes. The Old West wasn't for the faint of heart. A lot of renegades and ne'er-do-wells sought to get lost in the West because they were running from crimes committed back home. Many were Confederate soldiers on the losing side and needing work. Alcohol certainly played a part in all this. Many towns had saloons, beer and whiskey were cheap, and a man develops an awful powerful thirst herding cattle hundreds of miles to railheads. Add to this their views on law and order. If you were a crook and got a beating from a lawman, well, that's what you deserved. The townsfolk weren't above lynching crooks either, like Curly Bill would have been if Wyden hadn't saved him. There really is a lot to tell about this really interesting character who had at least 2 major motion pictures, books, and several TV shows made after him. It's an epic tale that will enthrall people who are interested in the Old West. If you like, look at Kevin Costner's movie Wyatt Earp and Tombstone. Both are decent movies, but they do gloss over the truth a bit. I really had a good time researching this one. I've always been interested in the Old West in the United States. There are more intriguing people and places of the Old West, like Deadwood and Wild Bill Hickok, that I may cover in the future. To quote an old wrestling commentator, in the meantime and in between times, that's it for another edition of Perspective. Take care and have fun.